Good evening, friends. Welcome to another evening with BNN. Good to see you, Geeta, Edward, hello, and hello, Melinda. Oh, Jessica, good to see you online, and Priyakant. All right, so, and of course, welcome to Bhante Sudha. So, Bhante will be sharing some thoughts on right livelihood today. Hello to Elaine and Grant, welcome. And we will start by chanting the Ratana Sutta as usual. And in the live chat, there is a link to the sutta so you can chant with us. Then we will be doing meditation as usual, and then Bhante will be sharing words of Dhamma. All right.
Okay. So we'll start with chanting Namo Tassa 3 times, and then we'll chant the Ratana Sutta together. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Yani Bhutani Samagatani Vummani Vayani Vantaleke Sabeva Bhuta Sumana Bhavantu Atopi Saka Chasunantu Vasitam Tasmahi Bhutani Sameta Sabe Vetam Karotamanusiya Pajaya Devacharato Chaharanti Evaling Tasmahine Rakata Pamatam Yam Kinchivitam Yitavahuram Vasage Suvayam Ratanam Panitam Nano Samamati Tathagatena Idampi Buddhe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Kayam Viragam Mamatam Panitam Yadajaga Sakyamuni Samahito Nathena Dhammena Samati Kinchi Dampi Dhamme Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Yang Buddha Seto Parivanai Suchim Samadhimanan Harikanyamahu Samadhina Tena Samona Vijati Dampi Dhamme Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Ye Bhugala Satam Pasata Chatari Etani Yugani Honti Kedakineya Sugata Sasavaka Ete Sudinani Mahapalani Edampi Sanghe Ratanam Paritam Etena Sachena Sugati Hotu Yesu Payuta Manasa Dalena Nikamino Gotama Sasanamhi Te Patipata Matam Vigaiha Ladha Mudhani Buddhim Bunjamana Idampi Sanghe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Yatindahilo Pakavinsito Siya Chatu Bivate Via Sampakampio Tatu Pamam Sapurisam Vadami O Arya Satchani Avechapasati Idampi Sanghe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Ye Ariya Satchani Vibhavayanti Gambhira Panyena Sudesitani Kinchapi Te Honti Busapamatana Te Bhavam Matamam Adiyanti Idampi Sanghe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Subhati Hotu Sahava Sadasana Sampadaya Taya Sudhamma Jahita Bhavanti Sakaya Deti Vechike Chitancha Silabhatam Vapiyadati Kinchi Chatuhapaye Hichave Pamuto Chachabitanani Abhabhokatu Idampi Sanghe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Savati Hotu Kinchapi Sokam Mankaroti Papakam Ayena Vacha Udacheta Sava Abhabbo Sota Sapati Chadaya Abhatadi Tapada Sabuta Idampi Sanghe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Vanapagumbe Yata Pusitade Gimhanamase Patamasmi Gemhe Tatupamam Dhammavaram Adesai Nibbanagamim Paramam Vidaya Idampi Buddhe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Varo Varanyo Varado Varaharo Anutaro Dhammavaram Adesai Idampi Buddhe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Kinam Puranam Navam Nati Sambhavam Virata Chitta Yatike Pavasmim Tehina Bija Viruli Chanda Nibbanti Gira Yatayam Paripo Idampi Sanghe Ratanam Panitam Etena Sachena Suvati Hotu Yani Bhutani Samagatani Bhummani Vayani Vantaleke Tathagatam Devamanusapujitam Buddham Namassama Suvati Hotu Yani Bhutani Samagatani Bhummani Vayani Vantaleke Tathagatam Devamanusapujitam Dhammam Namassama Suvati Hotu Yani Bhutani Samagatani Bhummani Vayani Vantaleke Tathagatam Devamanusapujitam Sangham Namassama Suvati Hotu Etena Sachavajjena Dukhabhupasamentu te Etena Sachavajjena Bhayabhupasamentu te Etena Sachavajjena Rogabhupasamentu te. All right, so please get in meditation posture and we'll do some meditation practice together. So by meditation posture, I mean the full lotus position. I haven't said that in a few days and I missed Ayasoma's eyes rolling, so I thought I'd bring it up again this evening. So please get in the full lotus position. If the full lotus position is not possible for you, then make a commitment to do some stretching every day until it is possible for you. In which case you can sit in the half lotus position. If that's not possible for you, again, get on your daily stretching regimen. But for now, you can sit in the quarter lotus position. If that's not possible for you, one, seriously, and two, get on your daily stretching regimen. If that's the case, you can sit in the zero lotus position. I see Ayasoma is adopting the zero lotus today. If you can't sit in the zero lotus position, well, you can sit in a kneeling posture or in a chair, or you can even stand. That's all somewhat acceptable. So once you've got your legs positioned properly in the full lotus position, then you can rock side to side a little bit to make sure that your weight is balanced evenly on your sitting bones without any pressure, especially pressure on your upper thighs, which might put your legs to sleep in a few minutes. You can tilt your pelvis slightly forward. One way I like to do this is to keeping my butt positioned on the cushion. I inch my knees forward a little bit. And that has a way of just pulling the pelvis into a slight forward tilt, which then makes the spine very straight and upright. Bring your shoulders back. Let them relax down your back. And allow your hands to come to rest together in your lap with the thumbs slightly touching. And take a few long, slow, deep breaths. With each breath, letting the body and mind relax. As if the breath was sweeping all the tension and thoughts from body and mind. Like a strong wind sweeping all the dust from a surface. Letting the body relax, especially the face, the eyes, the mouth. Letting it relax. You can slowly let your breath resume its natural rhythm. There's no need to control the breath, just let it be what it is. Bring attention fully into the body. Just focusing on feeling your body clearly, intensely, and precisely right here in the present moment. For the next period of time, we're not interested in the past. We're not interested in the future. We're only interested in being clearly, intensely aware of the physical experience happening right now. We're not comparing it to anything else. We're not expecting it to be any way. We're not rejecting the way it is. We're not wanting any certain experience. We're just interested in clearly knowing this physical experience right now, just as it is. Clearly feeling the body. And holding the mind still within awareness of the body. So, not moving attention through the body, not shifting from one part to another part, holding the mind still. So, you might focus on a certain part of the body, or you might feel the whole body all at once. But either way, we keep the mind completely still. Keeping the mind very alert, awake, vigilant, and relaxed, peaceful, serene. Keep focusing the mind on feeling the body sharply, strongly, clearly, with full acceptance that it's just like this. Keep focusing on the body. Nothing else matters for just a few more minutes. Nothing matters except focusing on the body. Can slowly, peacefully bring your legs out of the lotus position. Can rock from side to side a little bit. Do a little bit of stretching if you wish. Trying to keep that alert, peaceful mind.
All right. Well, thank you, Bhante, for guiding us in meditation. And welcome to a few more friends. Hello to Geeta. I'm glad you were capable of logging in, seeing audio and video. Welcome to Rich, Kevin, Jacqueline, Elaine, who says, Dear Aya Sama, commenting on a remark about the distance between us, I could drive to the empty cloud in about 8 hours, closer than we thought. Great. Perhaps when the border reopens, when we can all breathe a little easier. Yeah, you should come. Absolutely. And welcome to Mark, Adriana. Hello, Gabriella. Hope you're...
Gabriella.
Yes. All right. Hope you're feeling better and that the operation went well. Okay, so we can now, and hello AP. All right, so I'll pass it on to Bhante so we can start talking about right livelihood. Thanks, Bhante.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good evening, friends. So we're continuing our series on the Noble Eightfold Path. So today we've come to the 5th, which is right livelihood. So we've covered right view and right attitude, which are aspects of mind, right speech, which is speech, right action, which is part of body, and now we've come to right livelihood. So this is continuing on the theme of morality, of sila, of conduct, how we behave in the world. This is a really important principle that can't be emphasized enough. So Buddhism is not just about training the mind in meditation practice and in study, but it's about every single thing that we do. So nothing in our life is outside the domain of Buddhist practice. Everything in our life should be shaped by our commitment to Buddhist practice. And when we come to the issue of right livelihood, it's good to remember the fundamental principle of morality, which the Buddha brings up over and over again throughout the suttas, which is very simple. Do not harm yourself or others. Do good for yourself and others. So this is the basic moral principle which underlies all of the precepts, all of the teachings of the Buddha, actually. It all comes down to these two basic precepts. Don't harm yourself or others. Do good for yourself and others. So similarly, when we talk about right livelihood, the definition that we most commonly see in the suttas is abandon wrong livelihood. And it's like, well, okay, and what does that mean? What is right livelihood? What is wrong livelihood? If right livelihood is to not do wrong livelihood, then what is wrong livelihood? So going off that basic moral principle then, wrong livelihood would be any kind of business, work, or occupation which harms either yourself or others or both. That would be wrong livelihood. And also wrong livelihood would automatically include any livelihood which involves breaking the 5 precepts, or any livelihood which is contrary to Buddhist training. So any livelihood which requires you to go against your Buddhist training. So this is a basic principle of right livelihood, is not having any kind of job which requires you to break any of the 5 precepts, or which requires you to intentionally cultivate unwholesome thoughts, speech, or actions. So an example of this, so there's a friend of mine who, he was a monk for many years, but before he was a monk, he was in the military. And in the military, he was working in a division of intelligence, and he was assigned the job of producing false reports. So knowingly producing false reports. And he told his commanding officer, I'm a Buddhist, this violates my precepts, this goes against my basic religious principles, I can't do this. So please assign me another job. And it turned into this whole big affair where they eventually wound up just discharging him from the military. But the point was that was a case where he was given a work task which was directly contrary to one of the 5 precepts. So as he was trying to be a good Buddhist, he had to honestly say, I can't do this job. I cannot knowingly, intentionally lie as part of my job. It doesn't matter that this is an order I'm being given. It doesn't matter that this is considered to be for the greater good. I can't do it. I can't break my precepts for my job. So that's an example of being required to break the 4th precept for one's job. Another one which comes up is killing. This is kind of a very obvious one. So a good Buddhist, someone who's practicing right livelihood, would not have any job which involves killing living beings. So in that case, the friend who was in the military, he wasn't in a part of the military that involved combat. But if one is, but that would be an example of wrong livelihood. So to be a soldier in a combat role would be wrong livelihood. To be actively killing other humans, very wrong livelihood. So also the role of a murderer, an assassin, is wrong livelihood. So whether it's for a government or for a criminal organization doesn't make any difference. It's still wrong livelihood. Also things like a exterminator or a hunter. So killing animals or insects, again, wrong livelihood. We should not be engaged in any livelihood which involves killing other living beings. Of course, the job of a burglar or a thief, also clearly not correct. So again, anything which involves breaking the 5 precepts. And the more general thing of not engaging in any livelihood which causes harm. This gets into a little more complicated because often we have to really carefully consider, what is my job? What am I doing? And what are the consequences of what I'm doing with my job? Is it harming others? Is it harming myself? And if so, I need to see if there's a way of doing my job that does not cause harm. And if I can't find a way, then I need to start looking for another job, which I can do in a harmless way. So there's an interesting story from the life of Ajahn Chah. So there was a layperson who came to Ajahn Chah, and this layperson, I think they had been a hunter or something. And they came to Ajahn Chah and they said, well, right livelihood is really hard. I don't know how I can survive in the world without killing other living beings in order to get by. And Ajahn Chah said, well, then I'll teach you how to be an herbal doctor. And so Ajahn Chah spent many months training this layperson in herbal medicine, so that the layperson could then have a completely blameless, harmless livelihood. And I also find that story really lovely because this is contrary to what many people think a monk should be doing. Many people would say, like, oh, a monk shouldn't even know herbal medicine himself, let alone be teaching it to lay people. What is he doing? But actually, this was completely in accordance with Dhamma. It's teaching a layperson how to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. So it was in the mind of Ajahn Chah, it was exactly the right thing to do. And also it shows this deep caring about a layperson who has this genuine wish to follow the Buddha's teachings, but doesn't quite know the best way to go about doing it. So I really love this little story of Ajahn Chah teaching the layperson how to be an herbal doctor, teaching them herbal medicine. And in the suttas, there's a couple places where some specific examples are given of some broader examples of wrong livelihood. One of the more well-known ones, I was just looking right before the talk for the sutta references, so I didn't have time to do as thorough research as I normally like to do on these things, but I was able to pull up a couple suttas with some more. Are you amused by my notes?
Yes.
So I don't normally take notes at all, but on this occasion, I just like tore a scrap off of a bag and like quickly scrawled some things on it. And Ayasoma apparently was amused by this. Anyway, so I wasn't able to do as thorough of research as I like to do on these things, but I was able to pull up a couple references and make some quick notes about it. So one is from the Anguttara Nikaya, so 5.177, the Vanija Sutta, where the Buddha says that there are 5 kinds of trade that a layperson should not engage in. 5 kinds of unwholesome trade. So vanija, it's commonly translated as trade. So that refers to buying and selling. And there's been some debate about this. I think it's because people don't like the idea that we're not supposed to buy the things I'm about to mention. So some people like to insist it only means selling, but the word vanija quite clearly means both buying and selling. So one is not to engage in the trade of weapons. So a disciple of the Buddha, a sincere Buddhist practitioner, should neither sell nor buy weapons. Next, living beings. We should not buy or sell living beings. So that includes humans, of course. So one should not buy or sell human beings. But it also includes animals. We should not buy and sell animals. So people sometimes ask, is it okay to have pets as a Buddhist? And it's like, yeah, it's okay to have them, but it's not necessarily okay to buy them. It's not necessarily okay to go to a pet store and buy a kitten, for example. And why is that? Well, because it's supporting a business which is engaged in the inhumane mistreatment of animals. It's supporting a business which is treating living beings as commodities to be bought and sold, rather than treating them as living beings. So of course it's perfectly fine to have a cat, but be careful how you go about acquiring a cat. So the recommendation that we usually make is to adopt a cat from an animal shelter. Animal shelter, by the way, is the biggest misnomer in the world because animal shelters are notorious for keeping animals in extremely unsanitary, inhumane conditions and killing 90% of them. I'm not making that statistic up. 90% of the animals in so-called animal shelters in this country just get executed. There was a really sad story I came across a little while back of so there was a girl who had a pet dog, and the dog went missing. And the dog was picked up off the streets and executed within 24 hours. Before the girl even had a chance to find out what shelter the dog had been put in, it had already been put to death. And these are not uncommon stories. It happens all the time. So once again, if you want to have a pet, adopt it from a shelter so that it can have a good life rather than inhumane treatment. Do not go to animal breeders. Do not go to pet stores, because those are people and institutions which are contributing to the suffering of living beings. Rather think, how can I reduce the suffering of living beings? So not buying and selling any living being, not even animals. The next one, and this is where people start to get a little bit uncomfortable, is meat. The next item on the list is meat. So the Buddha says an upasika, a Buddhist lay disciple, should not be involved in buying and selling meat. This one, once again, is a little bit hard to get around, but people really like to try to find some way to worm around this one. So yeah, sorry, no buying and selling meat. And this should be pretty clear why. Once again, because it's directly supporting the inhumane treatment of living beings. So that's not acceptable. So the Buddha did not specifically forbid the eating of meat, as long as one does not believe that it was killed specifically for you. Then the act of eating meat itself is not specifically forbidden in the Theravada texts. It is forbidden in a few Mahayana texts, but not in any of the Theravada texts. But if you can't buy meat and you can't kill animals, then the circumstances under which you can acquire meat ethically are quite limited. It's basically limited to the life of an alms mendicant. Otherwise, one is not likely to be acquiring meat in any kind of blameless way. So while the Buddha does not specifically require vegetarianism in the Theravada Suttas, he does make it clear that ethically acquiring and consuming meat is quite a challenging thing to do. It's not impossible, but it's not easy to pull off either. The fourth one on the list is intoxicants. So one is not to buy and sell intoxicants. Again, this is pretty straightforward. So what's wrong with intoxicants? We also have the precept, of course, of not consuming intoxicants, but we also shouldn't be buying and selling intoxicants. And why is that? It's because intoxicants are directly antithetical to mindfulness and wisdom. They directly weaken our capacities for self-restraint and self-awareness. So intoxicants are undeniably contrary to Buddhist training and Buddhist principles. So we don't want to consume them ourselves, but we also don't want to encourage others to consume them. We don't want to enable others to get wrapped up in intoxicants and things which weaken wisdom, which weaken mindfulness, which weaken self-restraint. We don't want to be creating those conditions for ourselves or for others. So not engaging in buying and selling intoxicants either. And this is an issue where people often say things like, well, what if I'm a waiter in a restaurant? Am I selling intoxicants? And that's a bit more of a delicate issue. Does that qualify as selling intoxicants? There's different opinions on the matter. But since it is a gray zone, be very careful with gray zones, because gray zones often are less wholesome than we would like. Basically, if you're not completely convinced that something is wholesome, then there's a reasonable chance that it's not. In fact, there's a very good chance that it's not. And the fifth one is poisons. So we're not supposed to buy and sell poisons. Again, this is pretty straightforward. So what's the purpose of poisons? It is to make living beings sick or to kill them. So we don't want to engage in buying and selling substances which are specifically intended to sicken or kill living beings. We don't want to. So all of these things are about substances or activities or forms of trading, buying and selling, which contribute either directly or indirectly to the harm and suffering of other living beings. So we're not to be engaged in any kind of, especially livelihood, but also any kind of activity which contributes to the harm of living beings, whether directly or indirectly. Another list that we find, which is interesting, so this comes from Majjhima Nikaya number 117, the Mahachattarisika Sutta, the Sutta of the Great 40, which is a very interesting description of the Noble Eightfold Path. And it, under the section on right livelihood, it gives an example of 5 kinds of wrong livelihood. And these are a bit more subtle than the 5 that I just listed. And there's also a little bit of debate about how to properly translate them. So this always gets into fun things where there's multiple ways to translate uncommon terms. The first one is quite straightforward. It's deceit. So to make a living by means of deceit or fraud is wrong livelihood. I think that's pretty straightforward in theory, but in practicality, it often becomes, again, a lot of gray territories. So for example, working in finance, there may be a fair amount of deceit and fraud involved in what one is doing. Even if it's not legally a crime of fraud, still one may be involved in deceiving other people about the actual value of what you're dealing in, of what you're promoting or what you're investing in or what you're trading in. So not engaging in deceit. In any livelihood based on deceit or fraud. The second one, so the Pali word here is lapana, which there's a few ways of translating it. One is flattery. Another is prattle, like useless babbling, useless speaking. So it's a little bit unclear just what is being referred to here. So flattery, an occupation based on flattery, artificially building up the ego of other people is not necessarily the right way to make a living, perhaps not. Or useless speech, again, this is a way of filling people's minds with nonsense and meaningless noise. Again, maybe not the best way to make a livelihood. Again, these are relatively subtle ones. The third one on the list in Pali is nemitikata, which literally means making indications. And here there's a lot of debate about the proper meaning of this. So one translation of this is fortune telling. So not to engage in fortune telling. Astrology, or again, any kind of predicting the future or such things as a means of livelihood. This is also sometimes translated as hinting, but that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me in this context. Hinting as a form of wrong livelihood, I don't quite get that one. So I think it's more likely that the meaning here is in fact fortune telling. And the fourth one is, again, there's two ways of translating it. One is trickery, which also I think is quite reasonable. And the other is belittling. So insulting or tearing down other people as a livelihood. So I think both of these are quite reasonable explanations that are clearly in line with Dhamma, and thus can be taken as good guidelines for understanding right livelihood. And the fifth one, this one also is a little bit obscure. It seems to mean pursuing gain with gain, pursuing gain by gain. And this is a concept which comes up in the Vinaya as a case of monks who were giving gifts to lay people with the hopes that then the lay people would become ingratiated towards the monastics. So it's this particular case of monks bribing lay people in order to get on their good side. So it's a bit strange that it's mentioned in a sutta about wrong livelihood applied to a broader audience. But that is something also to keep in mind. Are we engaged in bribery? So it appears to be the subject that's being referred to here, bribery as an aspect of our livelihood. So the focus on these seems to mostly be around deceit. So forms of livelihood that involve deceit or fraudulence of some sort. So again, this is getting into somewhat more subtle issues of exploring what wrong livelihood is and how to avoid it. So in the Mahayana texts, and I didn't have time to get into the investigation of this, but in the Mahayana text, there's also quite a number of examples of right livelihood that are given. And it's things like doctors and nurses, people who build bridges and roads, people who unite and bring people together, people who mediate in conflicts. So examples given of people who are actively engaged in businesses that bring benefit to others, who are actively engaged in businesses that bring goodness into the lives of other people, that help and support living beings. So again, coming back to this basic overarching principle of making sure that our occupation, our livelihood, causes no harm to any living being, including ourselves. So we should also try to avoid a livelihood which is harmful to our own health, whether physical, mental, or emotional. So for example, I would also say that being a coal miner might qualify as wrong livelihood because coal miners live short, unpleasant lives. Basically, coal dust gets in your lungs and it destroys your body from the inside out. So is it good to be engaging in a livelihood which you know is destroying your health? No, because you're hurting someone. So it's not appropriate. It's not right livelihood. Or a job which is so stressful and emotionally draining for you that you find you're backsliding in your Buddhist practice. That's also not necessarily right livelihood. That's not necessarily what we should be doing. Or we need to find another way of doing that livelihood which isn't wearing us down so much. Or livelihood which is constantly threatening your sanity. So some people find, again, high stress occupations like military roles or working for law enforcement and so on to be so damaging to their sanity, so harmful to their sense of right and wrong, to their sense of goodness, that yeah, maybe again, it's not necessarily good to be engaged in an occupation which is threatening our sanity, just threatening our mental stability. I've also heard this from people who work in prisons, constantly working with trying to control and restrain violent criminals all the time. They find to be really damaging to their own sanity, their own sense of what's good and bad. So we need to be really careful about engaging in any livelihood which is harmful to our own well-being, as well as the well-being of others. So, and again, actively seeking out jobs which are of discernible, tangible benefit to living beings, which bring goodness into the world, which bring joy into the world, which bring fairness into the world, which bring health and happiness into the world, and optimally, which bring wisdom and compassion into the world. So, of course, the standard pinnacle of right livelihood is to be a monk. So I can check that one off the list. Great, right livelihood. But of course, not everyone is interested in being a monastic, and that's okay. In fact, that's to be expected. So then to really think carefully, how can I make a living in a way which is not only harmless, but beneficial to as many people as possible? So those are my thoughts on right livelihood. So at this time, we can go into questions. If there's any questions or comments, please type them in.
Thank you, Bante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So there are actually quite a few questions. Let me scroll all the way to the top. So Gabriela is asking, how do we do our best to select the right livelihood that will be with any connections to bad livelihood? For example, working at a restaurant or working as a pet care specialist and being involved with the sale of animals. In the end, I quit out of moral outrage, but I realized the people working there weren't really actually involved, like me. They wanted to care for animals and help animals get to good homes. The breeders would bring in sick and dying animals, or they'd bring in animals that the breeders didn't care for, and people at the store would have to pick up the care from there with teeth clenched and white knuckles. It was too much for me.
Yeah, so the fact that it was too much for you is a pretty good indication that it was the right choice to quit. And also, if you had pangs of conscience, pay attention to that. We really want to build up a clear awareness of our conscience. Every single sentient being has the innate ability to know right and wrong. And we have the ability to strengthen our awareness of our moral compass. So whenever we have a pang of conscience, pay attention to it. Don't shove it down. Don't ignore it. Because the more we ignore it, the weaker it gets. Until eventually you become a sociopath. Maybe not in this life, but in a future life. So we don't want to build up the conditions of being a sociopath. Pay very close attention to your conscience, because it often is giving us a warning that we're engaging in something which is inappropriate. So there are some people who their conscience is a little bit miscalibrated, and they think that something which is actually fine is unwholesome, but that's rare. And in those cases, consult with some monastics and see what they say on the subject. But actually, in that case, I think that quitting was the right thing to do. Again, to some extent, it does come down to intention. So, for example, if you were working for a pet store and you were only working in the role of taking care of the animals, then that might not be wrong livelihood. If your only job is just to take care of those living beings, to make sure that they're healthy and happy and well taken care of, then that's okay. But if you're engaged in the buying and selling side, well, that does actually get into a clear violation of right livelihood. So that's something where, yeah, it's to be looked at.
All right. Oh, sorry, Gita had a question on meditation.
So I think that's best to save for another time.
Monk chat, perhaps, or
Yeah.
actually during either the
Well, we have,
mindfulness and or samadhi. Yeah.
we have right mindfulness and right samadhi coming up. Those are both times. Also right effort. It might fit under right effort. It might also be relevant to one of the suttas we talk about. But if nothing else, you can always bring it up during monk chat or on the mornings when we have meditation, chanting and meditation mornings. Those are also a time to bring up meditation questions. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And Maria says, to be a good Buddhist and live a right livelihood, I wouldn't drink alcohol, not even a cup of wine, for example. I ask since it is one of the 5 precepts.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep, no alcohol, not even a cup of wine. That's correct.
And then also another question. I don't particularly buy it, but would buying leather be unwholesome? What if you buy the... would buying leather be unwholesome?
Wow, so now we're getting into really subtle things. Is buying leather unwholesome? I don't particularly think so. There is a slight connection with the animal farming industry, which is undeniable. But one of the really interesting little tidbits about the Vinaya is that in the Vinaya, it actually says the only kind of footwear that monks are allowed to wear is leather sandals. So clearly the Buddha didn't think that leather was a particularly big deal. But there's also no denying that leather is produced from the bodies of dead animals. And generally speaking, those are animals that were killed as part of the meat industry. Interestingly enough, sandals are also the only leather garment that monks are allowed to have. We can't have any other leather in our wardrobe, only our sandals. Yeah. What are your thoughts? I mean, it seems like a pretty minor issue, but yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I do advocate for non-animal garments as much as possible. Ooh, a very important one, silk. Never, ever, ever buy silk, ever. Ever. Do some research into how silk is produced. Basically, it's produced through boiling alive thousands and thousands and thousands of worms, silkworms. Unbelievable. Even producing enough silk for a single garment requires the mass murder. Again, boiling alive of sentient beings. It's one of the most horrifying aspects of the clothing industry. So don't buy silk ever. There are some very expensive and low quality kinds of silk which are made without killing silkworms. So those are okay, but they're not very popular because they're not very high quality and they're more expensive than regular silk. So basically just don't buy silk.
Yeah, also, I don't know, the fur industry, definitely, because they actually take animals just for that purpose.
Yeah.
So it's not even like feeding people, it's just killing them straight on for fur.
Yeah.
Leather, I have never done research, honestly, and how it's produced, but probably, I think you're kind of like in the better safe than sorry. Right now, there are so many different alternatives, actually, that you get the exact leather. When I was in the fashion industry, it was impressive. to see things that look like leather that were not actually made of leather. So actually, there's no problem these days. Very easy. So Victor, and actually both Victor and Marielle are asking the same questions. So Victor says, Bante, how about we buy birds that get caught and sold in actually, there's slightly different. Marielle says, what if you buy the animals so to set them free? And Victor asks, Bante, how about we buy birds that get caught and sold for the purpose to release it for good merit? They sell them in front of the most of the Chinese temple. Is it good karma or not good karma?
So this gets complicated. So there is a custom, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, there's a custom of setting free animals that have been caught. The problem is that this then leads to the formation of this peculiar sub-industry of people who breed or capture animals in order to sell them to the Buddhists so that the Buddhists can release them. So that's not particularly wholesome. We don't want to be involved in that cycle. So I'm not such a fan of that. So the theory is good. The theory is about releasing animals that have been captured, but the actual practical consequences are not particularly good. It's also been pointed out that often these are these like ceremonies where people will release thousands of captive animals, and then that winds up crashing the local ecosystem, which is suddenly flooded with thousands of invasive species, which then can't integrate properly into the ecosystem there. So again, it's something which in theory, it's a great idea, but in practicality, it often winds up causing lots of problems. So be very careful around these things. And keep in mind that when you buy an animal, you are contributing to the capture and torture of more animals. So you might think, oh, I'm just trying to set this one free, but what are the consequences of buying that one? It's more complicated than that, isn't it?
And Marielle says, so people who have the ability to see beyond the present shouldn't use their ability to have a living?
You're assuming you're referring to the fortune telling thing. Honestly, I'm not quite clear on why fortune telling is considered a dodgy occupation. I've never really given it much thought, to be perfectly honest. One thing to keep in mind from a Buddhist standpoint is that there's no such thing as predicting the future, because every time we make a choice, we are changing the future. So there is no set specific future. Even the Buddha, when he spoke about his ability to predict other people's likely future rebirths, he qualifies it by saying, if they continue to act in the same way that they are currently acting. So if they don't change their patterns and habits, if they keep doing exactly what they're currently doing, then they will wind up in such and such a destination. But that's quite a bit different from saying this person's fate is such and such. They will definitely get such and such. So as for fortune telling as an occupation, there does also, realistically, just to be perfectly honest, there does tend to be a lot of, at best, guesswork and often downright fraudulence involved in that field of work. I do believe there are a handful of fortune tellers who really are quite genuine about what they're doing. There's no guesswork or fraudulence involved in what they're doing. But still, it's a bit of a questionable occupation. I wouldn't get wrapped up in it if I was you.
Kevin says, well, I made the claim the other day that I practice right livelihood. I buy meat though, so guess not fully right just yet.
You're getting close though.
Oh, but he asks us a very interesting question. What about buying canned meat for pets, namely cats who are 100% carnivores?
Yeah, so this is one of the problems that is involved with having pets. Is that, yeah, as in the case of cats are obligate carnivores. They have to eat meat to survive. So if you have a cat, then you have the obligation to take care of your cat. And that means the obligation to buy meat for your cat. So that does mean that owning a cat means that you will be repeatedly incurring a little bit of bad karma, um, mixed in with the good karma of looking after and taking care of another sentient being. So it's mixed karma. And actually, I would say that in that case, the good karma of taking care of the animal outweighs the small bad karma of buying meat for it on a regular basis. Um, Especially if you rescued that animal from horrific conditions, then again, that's a very heavy hit of good karma to overcome the little bad karma of buying meat for it. And also keeping in mind that the cat doesn't have any other choice. They don't have anything else they can eat. Okay.
Thank you, Bante. And Maria says, so to be prime minister would be a bad livelihood since it threatens anyone's sanity.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Oh.
I mean, I don't want to be a politician. And I mean, I'm happy somebody does it because I guess we need politicians in order to run countries and things. But yeah, I wouldn't want to do it. That would be difficult for sure.
And Victor asks, is buying fermented food with minor alcohol in it a problem, like with cooking wine or fermented sticky rice considered wrong livelihood?
So my understanding is no. So things which have tiny amounts of alcohol, that's okay. So this is the case with a lot of naturally fermented foods. They contain very tiny amounts of alcohol. So not anywhere near enough to actually have any intoxicating effect, but just trace quantities. So for example, kombucha. Kombucha is a naturally fermented tea beverage, which contains like tiny amounts of alcohol, like 0.1%, tiny amounts. So in monasteries, it's considered perfectly okay. It's not considered an intoxicant. It's not considered alcohol. And actually, in the Vinaya, the Buddha even said that medicines, which have tiny amounts of alcohol, are allowable as long as the alcohol cannot be tasted or smelled. As long as it doesn't taste or smell like alcohol, then it's fine. So again, trace amounts are okay. Okay.
Okay, and then there's a bunch of thoughts on actually leather that are quite interesting. So Marielle says, that's the thing, as a vegetarian, I don't buy leather, but then after buying other materials, I realized I was being irresponsible with the environment because leather can last for a lifetime. The other materials, you have to buy them over and over again. It's complicated, but I have decided for particular items to buy them as leather. And AP is informing us that the leather industry causes incredible cruelty to animals, unless it's from an animal that is already dead. It depends on how the leather was obtained.
Yeah, my understanding is that most of the leather in this country comes from the cow farming industry. That it's a byproduct of the meat industry, basically.
Well, then if it's a byproduct, then it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, it's not.
It's like a discard. Otherwise, it would go in the trash.
Otherwise, it goes in the trash, yeah.
Because fur is just like, it's not a byproduct. It's like an actual product. Actually, the majority of cat food is also a byproduct of the meat industry.
Yeah, I thought that too. It's the scrapings from the factory floor that can't be sold to humans. So they grind it up and sell it to animals, sell it for animals. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit different when you're dealing with byproducts. of an industry rather than the main product of an industry. So I also, again, I feel like leather is a pretty mild issue. Again, it's not in the same category as like buying guns and poisons and so on. Yeah, it's not the same at all.
And Kevin is saying, also anything with down. I recently barred all purchase of down and things like pillows, comforters, clothes, etc. Yet I still buy meat, which is worse, but making an effort.
Hey, one step at a time, you know? Rome wasn't built in a day.
I'm just like now imagining Kevin's wife that all of a sudden Kevin's like, no, that we can't do anymore. No, that we can't do anymore. And she's like, what the hell?
We've got vegan pillows, vegan shoes, vegan belts, but we're gonna have beef for dinner.
But then you're gonna like, oh wait, sorry, I just learned that we can't also do that. It's like those crazy Buddhists.
Anyway, Kevin, I appreciate your sincerity.
Yeah, it's great. Adriana says, haha, I was hoping kombucha would be addressed. Okay, I'm good. So, all right, that was the last question, unless anything else pops up in the last minute. Maybe not.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And we will be meeting tomorrow again with Bhante Sudazo, actually, for another sutta study. And then in the evening, we will be talking about right effort. So
with Ayasoma.
Or Bhante J. Or Bhante Sudazo. No one can get enough of Bhante Sudazo. Morning and night, morning and night.
Long livelihood. Because it drives you crazy. Teaching too much Dhamma.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining in.
Have a great.